July 9th, 1940. London, England. The city is a flurry of wartime chaos. Yet within the walls of the British Embassy, an almost surreal silence hangs in the air. The hum of teleprinters and the clinking of typewriters are the only sounds breaking the stillness. Harry Houghton sits at a small desk in the corner of a dimly lit room, where the only light comes from a single, flickering bulb overhead. His fingers brush against piles of documents, official papers, routine dispatches from distant embassies, nothing out of the ordinary. To the untrained eye, it seems like another day in the bureaucratic machinery of the British government. But Harry knows something that others do not. This is not just another day. Harry Houghton had never been meant for greatness. Born to modest means, a clerk by trade, his role at the embassy had always been one of quiet obscurity. He wasn't a diplomat, nor was he a man of action. He was simply a cog in a machine, filing papers, copying correspondence, and doing the mundane tasks that few would notice. To his superiors, he was just another desk jockey, another pair of hands that could be replaced in an instant. But he had something that they didn't: a keen mind, an eye for detail, and a growing unease with the routine monotony that enveloped the war effort. Harry's job wasn't glamorous, nor was it remotely exciting. Most days, he sat quietly, sorting documents, filling out forms, and maintaining records. It was a dull existence, but it was safe, predictable, and in many ways, comforting in the chaos of the world at war. The hours were long, the work tedious, but at least it was clear. Or so it seemed. But that morning was different. There was a strange tension in the air that Harry couldn't quite place. It wasn't just the usual hum of wartime activity. It was something else, something more subtle, yet far more ominous. As he flipped through the diplomatic dispatches, one of the envelopes caught his eye. It wasn't marked with the usual symbols or addressed in the standard manner. There was something irregular about it, but it wasn't the kind of irregularity that would normally make Harry's superiors take notice. No, this was something much subtler, a small anomaly, a slip of the hand. It was a pattern that Harry had seen before, but only in the most carefully hidden of places. He opened the envelope slowly, his eyes scanning the contents with a practiced focus. There was no immediate reason for concern. At first glance, the words were innocuous: routine intelligence updates, military dispatches from embassies overseas. But as he read between the lines, a pattern began to emerge, one that was far too deliberate to be dismissed as a coincidence. A code, a hidden message buried beneath layers of seemingly innocuous information. Harry wasn't an expert in cryptography or intelligence work, but he had a sharp mind and a penchant for spotting patterns. It wasn't much, just a few stray words here and there, nothing that anyone would normally catch. But Harry wasn't anyone. He was a man who had spent countless hours poring over documents, looking for inconsistencies, looking for things that didn't fit. And this was something that didn't fit. The message was subtle, like a whisper in the wind, barely audible, yet unmistakable once it was heard. A name, a location, a date. They didn't seem to make sense together, yet Harry instinctively knew that they held some kind of meaning. He had no idea what it meant, or even if it was important, but the feeling that something was terribly wrong gnawed at him. It was as if he had stumbled upon a secret, one that was never meant to be revealed. As he sat there, staring at the message, the weight of the discovery settled in. What was this? Was it an accident? Or was it something far more sinister? Harry had no answers, only a growing sense of dread. He was a clerk, not a soldier. He was no spy, no agent of the crown. He wasn't even a trained analyst. He was simply a man sitting at a desk, doing his job, keeping the wheels of bureaucracy turning. But now, it seemed as if the very machinery of the state was hiding something far darker beneath its polished surface. For a moment, Harry hesitated. What was he supposed to do with this information? It wasn't his place to raise alarms or make decisions. He wasn't trained to handle intelligence matters. He was just a lowly clerk. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that he couldn't ignore it. He couldn't just let this go. He knew that if he didn't act, if he didn't bring it to someone's attention, the consequences could be catastrophic. But who could he trust? The embassy was filled with powerful men, diplomats and military officials who dealt in secrets every day. Would they believe him? Would they take him seriously? Or would they dismiss him as just another cog in a machine? He was just a clerk, after all. What did he know about codes and intelligence? He wasn't even supposed to be looking at these documents in the first place. But deep down, Harry knew that he couldn't just walk away. The discovery had already begun to eat at him, gnawing away at his conscience. So, he did what anyone in his position would do. He decided to take the risk. He knew it was dangerous, that it could get him into trouble, but something about the message wouldn't let him go. He couldn't shake the feeling that it was important, that it mattered. So he copied down the details, making sure to record everything as accurately as possible. He had no idea what it all meant, but he knew it was something worth investigating. Later that afternoon, as the day stretched on, Harry sat nervously at his desk, waiting for the right moment. The embassy was busy, the usual clatter of conversation and telegraphs filling the air. No one paid him any mind, and for a moment, he felt almost invisible, lost in the sea of mundane office work. But in his hands, he held something that could change the course of history, a single cryptic message that no one else had seen. A message that could hold the key to uncovering a massive espionage plot against the crown. But time was running out. He knew that the longer he waited, the more likely it was that someone else would stumble upon the truth, or worse, that the message would be lost in the bureaucracy. The urgency of the situation was starting to sink in, and Harry knew he had to act fast. But what if he was wrong? What if it was just a mistake, a harmless oversight that would lead him down a dangerous path? He didn't have the answers, only the certainty that he had uncovered something that shouldn't have been there. With a deep breath, he stood up, his heart pounding in his chest. It was time to take the next step. But who could he turn to? Who could he trust? The weight of the decision pressed on him, but there was no turning back now. He had already crossed the line, already seen the hidden message that no one was supposed to find. And so, as the sun began to set over the rooftops of London, Harry Houghton made his decision. He would find someone who could make sense of what he had uncovered. He would find someone who would listen. And he would hope, against all hope, that he wasn't too late. Little did he know that the discovery of a simple coded message would soon set off a chain of events that would lead him into a world of espionage, danger, and intrigue far beyond anything he could have imagined. But for now, Harry could only wonder. Had he stumbled upon a crucial piece of history, or was he simply the unwitting pawn in a much larger game? The only thing he knew for certain was that the silence of the embassy would never feel the same again. August 15th, 1940. Liverpool, England. The war had already begun to reshape everything. The city buzzed with activity, a strange mix of anxiety and hope that pervaded every corner. The daily life of civilians and military personnel alike was marked by a collective sense of tension. It was the same every day, yet every day felt different. For Harry Houghton, the realization of the gravity of his discovery had not been lost in the noise of the ongoing war. Now, he found himself in a world far removed from the quiet bureaucracy of the British Embassy. He was out of his depth, alone in a foreign world of intelligence and military espionage. And yet, this was where he had to be. This was where the puzzle he had uncovered demanded to be solved. He sat at his desk in a small office within the cavernous, dimly lit building, his mind racing as he mulled over the cryptic message he had found. The edges of the paper in his hands were frayed from where he had nervously crumpled them. He had been carrying the document with him for days, unsure of who to trust. He had no clear answers, only a growing sense that time was slipping away. Every minute that passed without action made the stakes higher. He had no training in code breaking, no formal education in intelligence work. He was simply a clerk who had stumbled upon something that could change the course of the war. And now, he had to figure out what to do with it. The room was quiet except for the faint sound of distant footsteps echoing down the corridor. Harry's breath was shallow, his heart pounding in his chest. He had sent word to his superiors, to those in charge of British intelligence, but his message had been met with silence. There was a chance that the information he had uncovered was inconsequential, that it didn't mean anything at all. But Harry couldn't let it go. He couldn't unsee what he had found. The unease that gnawed at him was unbearable. He couldn't sit idly by while something so important, so dangerous, lurked in the shadows of bureaucracy. And so, he took a step that would change everything. With no official clearance, no authority, and no real knowledge of the world he was entering, Harry decided to take matters into his own hands. He would seek out someone who might understand the significance of what he had discovered, someone who might take him seriously. But that was easier said than done. The world of intelligence was a tightly guarded secret, and those who worked in it were notoriously distrustful of outsiders. Harry knew that he wasn't part of that world, that he had no real standing, no credibility. But there was no choice. He had to find someone who would listen. It wasn't long before Harry found himself sitting across from an intelligence officer named Richard Holloway, a man with sharp features and a demeanor that suggested he was no stranger to secrets. Holloway was a man of few words, his eyes always scanning the room as if waiting for something to jump out at him. He was the kind of person Harry had imagined when he thought of spies: cold, calculating, detached. But there was something else in his eyes, something that hinted at the burden he carried. Holloway listened to Harry's account of the coded message with barely a flicker of emotion. He took the document from Harry's trembling hands and read it in silence, his face betraying no hint of what he was thinking. When he finished, Holloway folded the paper carefully and placed it on the desk. He looked at Harry, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Harry's mind raced, his stomach twisted in knots. He had no idea what would come next, no idea if he had made a mistake in bringing this to Holloway's attention. But he had taken a step, and now there was no going back. Finally, Holloway spoke, his voice low but steady. "You've done the right thing by bringing this to me, Mr. Houghton. This is significant." Harry's heart skipped a beat, a rush of relief flooding through him. He had feared for so long that his discovery was nothing more than a fluke, a coincidence that would be dismissed as meaningless. But Holloway's words, however calm, were a sign that he had stumbled upon something that mattered, something that could change everything. Holloway's eyes narrowed as he continued, his voice tinged with the weight of the revelation. "This is more than just a message. This is a network, a web of spies operating within our own government. This is bigger than we imagined." Harry could hardly believe what he was hearing. A network? A web of spies? He had never imagined that his discovery would be connected to something so vast, so dangerous. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. There were traitors in their midst, people working against the very forces that sought to protect their country. It was one thing to uncover a single encrypted message, but to find out that there was a hidden network of spies infiltrating the highest levels of government was something entirely different. The implications were terrifying, but there was no time to dwell on the magnitude of what had been uncovered. The danger was real, and it was closing in fast. Holloway's expression darkened as he leaned forward, his gaze fixed intently on Harry. "You're in this now, Mr. Houghton. There's no turning back. We'll need you to help us with this." Harry swallowed hard, his throat dry. The weight of Holloway's words hung heavy in the air. He was no longer just a clerk. He had been thrust into the heart of a conspiracy that could bring down the entire war effort. He was no soldier, no trained spy. But now he had no choice. He had to do whatever it took to stop this threat, no matter what the cost. In the days that followed, Harry was drawn deeper into the world of intelligence. He sat in darkened rooms with officers who spoke in hushed tones, their faces masked in secrecy. The air was thick with tension, and every word seemed laden with the weight of 1,000 unspoken truths. Harry worked alongside experts, learning the intricacies of code breaking and cryptography, skills he had never imagined he would need. It was a steep learning curve, and the pressure was immense. He wasn't just working for his country now. He was working to prevent a catastrophe. Every mistake, every misstep could have deadly consequences. As the days turned into weeks, Harry's sense of isolation grew. He was no longer the man sitting at a desk, sorting papers and filling out forms. He was part of something much bigger, much more dangerous. And with every new piece of the puzzle he uncovered, he realized just how deep the conspiracy ran. It was like pulling on a thread, only to discover that the entire fabric of their world had been woven with lies, deception, and betrayal. But amid the uncertainty and fear, Harry found something unexpected: purpose. For the first time in his life, he felt as though he mattered. The skills he had honed as a clerk, his attention to detail, his ability to spot patterns, were suddenly invaluable. He was no longer just a cog in a machine. He was playing a critical role in the fight for his country's survival. But the cost was high. The closer he got to the truth, the more danger he found himself in. Every day was a risk. Every moment brought him closer to the edge. And yet, despite the fear and uncertainty, Harry couldn't shake the feeling that this was where he was meant to be. He had been a clerk, an insignificant figure in a world of diplomats and generals. But now, he was part of something greater than himself. He had a chance to make a real difference. He could stop the network of spies before it was too late. He could help protect his country. But with every step forward, the stakes grew higher, and the line between friend and foe grew ever more blurred. As the weeks passed, Harry's sense of urgency deepened. The message he had uncovered was only the beginning. The full extent of the conspiracy was still unclear, but one thing was certain. The more he uncovered, the more dangerous it became. And with each new revelation, Harry found himself questioning everything: the motives of those around him, the loyalties of those he trusted, and the very nature of the war they were fighting. Would he be able to uncover the truth before it was too late? Or was he already too deep in a web of lies to escape? The clock was ticking, and Harry knew that he couldn't afford to wait much longer. The world was at war, and everything he had learned so far suggested that the enemy was already among them. The question was no longer whether they would win the war. It was whether Harry would survive long enough to see it through. February 4th, 1941. London, England. The days blurred together as the war raged on. For Harry Houghton, the world he had known before seemed distant, an echo of a time that no longer held any meaning. The war had consumed everything. He had gone from being a simple clerk in an embassy to an unrecognized hero in the shadows. His name whispered only among a select few who understood the value of the work he had done. But despite the monumental contributions he had made, the victories he had helped secure, Harry found himself standing on the outside, looking in. He had done what few others could. He had uncovered a spy network operating within the heart of Britain's intelligence system, a network that could have brought the country to its knees. And yet, none of it mattered. At least, not in the way Harry had hoped.